Hey, welcome everybody to the Ancient Angels podcast. This is our first episode. I've got my buddy JT here, and we're going to be talking about everything Nephilim. And we're just going to kind of give a base stuff about Nephilim that for those that aren't aware of Nephilim and don't have a good understanding of it, this is a perfect episode to watch. For those that have watched it, we're going to throw in a little bit more interesting insights on it. So hopefully it's not too boring for people that also know as much about the Nephilim as they've studied as we all have kind of gone into it. But in the future episodes, we're going to be discussing some stuff that is a lot more in depth as to who the Nephilim are, like where they've gone, like what's the genetic links of them in our world today, the society that we see, because surprisingly, like Rh negative blood, we're going to be talking about genetics. Like people don't know, but the Nephilim bloodline is still lingering in our society, and there's connections to it and a lot of different things, and how this is going to play out in our future, guys, and what's coming and this kind of stuff. So this is going to be a real interesting podcast. Hopefully you guys are going to learn a lot, and yeah, we're just going to like jump into it and be posting this hopefully every week. We're going to try to get something out that'll be pretty cool that I think everybody's going to love. So yeah. Welcome, JT. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, man. I said I'm excited. I'm saying like this is something we probably should have done a long time ago. And I think that sometimes I think we all as content creators fall into the traps of like obviously the things that are new to me is lots of things I want to talk about because like I'm excited about talking about them, and some things that I have to almost go back and rekindle my like excitement for like this stuff about Nephilim. I mean, obviously it was exciting enough for us that we made a whole movie about it. And Lord willing, we'll make some more. And I think that this podcast will maybe be the kind of the kick in the rear end to kind of get us toward doing that. So obviously, if you guys want to see more episodes of Ancient Angels, a good way to do this would be show how much you like this kind of podcast, you like this topic, then we'll likely to make more of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think that to me, that when on my journey of awakening, finding about Genesis 6 was like, oh my gosh, how did I never know this?
It was like the light bulb moment, huh?
Yeah, it was just like it's one of those weird things when you read this, and we'll just go right into like I'll just read this just because I mean obviously this is the first podcast talking about this, and so you can basically consider this Nephilim 101. You know, so like I know a lot of people are saying, "Oh, well, this is old." Well, this whole topic is really old. So
yeah, it's really old.
So it really is old. I mean, it's old enough to be in the 6th chapter of the first book in the Bible. So it's like, yeah, it's pretty old. But yeah, so this is really interesting. So I'm going to go right down. I'm going to start from just the beginning of Genesis 6, and it says, "When men began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives as any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown."
No, can I say something real quick? There's
absolutely,
because you mentioned that second verse that you read. It says that my spirit shall not reside with man, for he is mortal, and his days shall be 120. I want to give everybody something new here about 101 Nephilim stuff that people miss over in that verse. Did you notice the verse before talks about Nephilim and the verse after talks about Nephilim? Okay, so what makes you think that my spirit shall not reside with man because man is mortal and his days shall be 120 years? This is the verse that many people say, oh, man's life expectancy is supposed to only be 120 years. It says it in the Bible. This is the verse that everybody pulls from. Okay, I'm gonna tell you right now, that ain't talking about man. That verse is talking about the age of the Nephilim. That the Nephilim's age shall be 120. This is my theory, and I got some pretty substantial stuff to back it up. I don't know what JT's theory on that specific is.
I've got a little different take, and I think that's going to be kind of interesting about this podcast. Again, I being Brian, we don't always agree about things. We had some arguments when we were making the movie, but yeah, I mean, I think overall it's like, I think these are kind of like mysterious subjects, and I think that's why it's interesting. And I don't think that these are not like, reasons to break fellowship over. But yeah,
No, no.
but we do disagree, and I think that obviously it's up for you guys to find what you find more credible. The Holy Spirit tells you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. And so you can share your perspective, but what I wanted to just discuss was that, from the studying that I've done and the genetic stuff that I've looked into, the narrative perspective that I've seemed to lay out in that understanding is that like it's funny that our life expectancy on average is 120 today. Like
no, well, not on average. I mean,
well, I mean
there's not
like
many people.
max life
Okay.
expectancy, right? Is like 120 today. And I find it very fascinating because what is that alluding to? Because that verse where it says my spirit shall not reside with man, that word is actually be joined with, which is actually what it says in the verse before. It says the sons of God, it said came into the daughters of men. Okay, it means they joined with them. So what he was saying is he's saying because man is mortal, my spirit, which is the sons of God, the spirit of the sons of God joining with man because man is mortal, their days shall be 120. And it's my belief that's the reason why people's life expectancy got shorter and shorter and shorter after this event happened. And so because after that event, 120 years, God put a label on people's life. But guess what? Multiple people after that verse lived beyond 120 years. So we know that verse of 120 obviously wasn't referring to humans necessarily, because why did Moses or why did Noah, who came after that verse, live much older? Why did all the people? There's multiple people that lived over 120 years that came after that verse, and there's even in older Bibles there's mistranslation of an extra 650 years that's been missing that adds even more people that lived longer than 120 years after that verse. So it's kind of like, well, why would God say that his man shall be 120 and then all these people are living much longer beyond that point? Is very suspect to me. So my perspective of that verse was to tell you that people that have the genetic remnants of the Nephilim in their body, their age cap will be capped. And there's even more evidence if you read the book of Josephus. And Josephus actually talks about
the antiquity of the Jews.
The antiquity of the Jews. Yeah, Josephus talks about specifically, now that Josephus is a historian who wrote about the events that happened after Jesus died. Okay, guys, everybody, 100% you need to read Josephus, by the way, because we're probably going to talk a little bit about some of this kind of stuff too on this channel.
Sure, yeah, I'm sure it'll get into that.
Yeah, and so like the when you understand what Josephus was writing about, he actually mentions that in Egypt, he said that if Egypt had their way, this is a quote, if Egypt had their way, the world would certainly be filled would no longer if Egypt had their way, the world would no longer be filled with mankind, but instead be certainly filled with the wildest sorts of brute beasts, because Egypt raises up with great care beasts that are unnatural and contrary to that of men. He says that in Egypt there was creatures that were not fully human that existed. He has multiple references to this. And one other key point that he mentions is he says, who is there that does not know that Egypt was full of all sorts of wild beasts and all sorts of sickness? And when he says wild beasts, he's referring to animal-human hybrid mixing. Okay, and so it alludes to the fact that Egypt was overrun. He talks about, this historian talks about Egypt being overrun with various types of animal-human hybrids and lots of sickness, like diseases and things like this nature. So why did these sicknesses come into our gene pool? Well, they came into our gene pool because of the fallen angels breeding with animals and humans, shortening the life expectancy, lessening. And in fact, we see it today. That's why people die early. In fact, it's my belief that every sickness that we see in the world today is genetically linked to some form of demonic angelic interference with our genetic pool. This is part of the reason why Jesus healed people. Like, Jesus came in to heal people literally because he was correcting the genetic perversion that was happening from the fallen angels. Anyways, that was the biggest rant I've rolled on. Sorry.
You know what I think the 120 years means?
Go for it.
I think that the way I read the beginning of Genesis, Of course, I mean, to preface this, like Genesis 6 is what's leading into the flood story,
Mm-hmm.
the days of Noah. So like
Mm-hmm.
the whole it's kind of like setting up why God decides to send the flood to destroy the earth. And so when it says that he sees all the wicked, God's seeing all the wickedness that's happening on the earth, and he's saying, my spirit's not going to abide in man for but 120 years. I think it's my belief, and I just think this makes the most logical sense, is that God is going to destroy the earth in 120 years. Everyone's going to die. He's going to eat, like it's kind of like to me it seems like God's intention is to kill everybody and just start again. But then I think it's kind of like, but then he sees Noah and he says he sees a man who's worth saving. And then it's almost like, kind of in the way that like God was going to destroy the Israelites a couple of times. And then it was like, even says, in the
Moses stopped him.
KJV, it says that God repented. Well, it's like God changed his mind, that he decided not to, but it's God's intention. He was going to do it. And so like man, Nephilim, everything, they were only going to get 120 years. And that's why, like, it doesn't really ever say exactly how much time it takes for Noah to build the ark. But it's like, once again, it's a story of God's timing, is that God did not send the flood until Methuselah died, which is interesting. It's like, that certain people die so they don't have to suffer through. Like, he's not going to make this righteous old man go through. Probably, if not, obviously, again, the Battle of Armageddon, all the things we could talk about in the other podcast, that this was obviously one of the most horrific times to ever be alive, is the wickedness of the Nephilim, and then followed by just like, you can only even, I mean, you can't even imagine what it would have been like to watch all the earth just get swamped by a flood and everything that you ever knew just get wiped away. I mean, as bad as it was, I mean, that had to be a rough time.
Yeah, and
But
yeah, and we're another thing, I got to bring Dr. Dino on this podcast. Actually, this is a totally great opportunity. I'm gonna bring Kent Hovind on here because we'll talk about this kind of stuff. Because he has a perspective of the flood, of it happening when the flood dropped down to the earth, and he thinks it was the water canopy around the earth, the waters above, that dropped onto the earth, and then they precipitated into clouds, which is why we have rainbows now. And that's a very interesting perspective and theory that I want to bring into and talk about as well. It's just something else as a side note. But yeah, it was obviously a very catastrophic time, a very destructive thing. And this is the reason why God, we believe, I think we both agree on this point, is that obviously everybody has different opinions on this matter, because it is a very, there's not a lot of evidence for this for this subject. There's a lot of evidence to look at. There's a lot of pieces, broken pieces. But to put all the pieces together and to connect it to our reality in a world today is a very tricky subject, which is why we're doing this podcast, to kind of give some peace of mind and understanding with people. And then hopefully, we'll come to some consensus of whatever. But I think what we both agree on is God didn't just flood the earth because the earth was full of evil, wickedness, guys. Like, God flooded the earth because it was full of genetic, angelic corruption that had perverted the genome and the gene pool of the entire world, except for Noah and potentially his sons to some degree. Maybe even his wives still have some perversion. We don't really, I mean, that's again a debatable subject, because somehow this genetic perversion obviously continued or persisted afterwards. So this is also a subject that is slightly debatable in this regard. But yeah,
let's read a little bit more, and I want to hit a few things on here that are very important and fundamental to this topic. Sure. Okay, so starting with verse 5, it says, as I was saying, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of his thoughts of his heart were only evil continually. And the Lord regretted he made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I've created from the face of the land, man, animals, creeping things, birds of heavens. I am sorry that I've made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So that's why I was saying it's almost like he decided he was going to do this, but then Noah. And then it said, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, a blameless in his generation, and Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight. the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their ways on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them from the earth. And so that's when eventually he tells him to make the ark. But as you said, a couple of things just to point out that are very important is that God said he was going to destroy the earth because man was wicked, but it also said that all flesh had corrupted their ways on the earth. So now going back to the start of that chapter, when it says the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were fair. So there's two interpretations of this. There's one correct one, and we're going to do the correct one.
Yeah.
Some people would say the sons of God were the
Sons
line of Seth.
Yeah.
The line of Seth. So obviously, you go from Adam to Seth, right? Because obviously Abel's killed. The line of Cain is likely destroyed in the flood. And so you have Seth, and so Seth's line would be the godly men. And obviously Noah's in the line of Seth. Now here's the thing. So in the KJV, Nephilim is translated into giants, right? So the daughters of men. So remember, sons of God and daughters of men. The sons of God are angels, or that's the best description. They're divine beings. They're beings from heaven. And so I think what that actually means is when it says daughters of men would be like, we are sons of men. Even like Jesus was
Jesus
actually
is
called,
a son of man.
He was the son of man. I think obviously
which means a human, by the way.
We know he was born. We were born in the line of men. But even when you look at the genealogies, even going all the way back to in the New Testament, that when it traces Jesus' line all the way back to Adam, Adam was a son of God. Because what it really means is he's a direct creation of God. Like nobody procreated to make him. Like God directly made him. So when it mentions in the Bible the sons of God, it's like God made the angels. And obviously even mentions, Jesus talks about that in the resurrection we'll be like angels, so we won't be needing of wives and husbands.
Oh yeah, let me read that. Matthew 22:30. It says, at the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven. And it's interesting because something in that verse, just to mention real quick, is that it says the angels will neither marry nor be given unto marriage, which actually implies that there was female angels, surprisingly, which is something that I usually speak against typically. And I made a video a long time ago, telling people guys, most angels are men, which they are. But the interesting part is that there are female angels, because you don't give who's given into marriage? A female, right? And it says they'll be like the angels of heaven. And so they're not married nor given unto marriage. And so it's an interesting subject to think about. And then,
well, certainly, I think what you'll find here, and I think that one of the reasons there's a lot of mystery is we talk about this often, is that there's really not a lot about the angels in the Bible. It's like they are mysterious, and I think there's a reason for that, because we mentioned on some of these other podcasts about there's something alluring about angels. There's something alluring about Nephilim. And so that's why the details are few in there. Interesting, in the Bible, the only two angels that are ever mentioned by name in the Bible are Gabriel and Michael. And that's it. That's the list. That's the whole list. And obviously there's other angels mentioned in the Apocrypha.
Uriel and
Raphael and different angels like that. There is, and I believe that those are legit angels, and I think that those are like Brian and I will get more into this about which Apocrypha we find credible and which ones we don't. But yeah, I think that's legit. But it's interesting, in the canon, and obviously in some of the most important books, they're just not mentioned by name. Obviously, Michael and Gabriel have a very big hand in the story that's told. I mean, obviously, Gabriel's involved in the birth of Jesus, and Michael's involved in all kinds of things, including kicking the devil's rear end out of heaven in the Book of Revelation,
and arguing with over the dead body of Moses.
Yeah, we'll have to. I mean, I can't wait to get into some of that stuff. But yeah. So that being said, you have to understand. So how was all flesh corrupted? Okay, so it makes sense to me that angels who were not intended to breed with people did. And then some people would say, well, how does a spirit breed with people? I
Well,
mean,
how
it's
did Jesus
obviously
get
that
made?
it's obvious
Jesus was a
that,
spirit that was bred with a person.
well, the Holy Spirit obviously impregnated Mary, and we in some kind of way, but also it does seem, based on some of the other chapters with the angels, angels can kill people. So like they can manifest physically in some kind of way. So like they are spirit, but they can obviously manifest physically. How does it work? I don't know. I don't know how anatomically it all worked. But what it says is what it says. And so what's plain and obvious, and what should be plain and obvious to everyone, if the line of Seth took wives of the daughters of men, they would create other men and women. They would not create Nephilim. They would not create giants. They would not be corrupted flesh, right? Because this is even before the law, so they don't even talk about really necessarily that they were all sinning. It just says, it says what it says. It said there was evil in their hearts and flesh was corrupted.
Continuously, yeah.
Yeah, so there was violence and all kinds of other things. And if you want, Brian, maybe we can read a little bit of
Jude.
Enoch chapter 6 to kind of get a little bit of clarity on like what this means. And obviously Brian and I just disclosure, we both, Brian and I, believe that first Enoch should be in the Bible. I don't believe, neither of us believe it's contradictory, and I think it fleshes this story out.
And another thing I would say, another thing I would say with that is that not only was first Enoch supposed to be in the Bible, because I know a lot of people are probably watching this are cringe just now. They're like, ah! And so like, here's the deal. The first Enoch book was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, y'all. It was the second most copied remnant found text. There was 42 different copies of it that they found in the Dead Sea Scrolls that verified the Bibles that we have today. Okay, so like if you want to argue that, first Enoch was found in there. And in fact, there was a few other texts that was found in there that people try to brush off. But if you go ahead and read the Dead Sea Scrolls, your perspective, I'm going to tell you right now, your perspective of whether that this is talking about sons of God were angels or men or Seth is going to be cleared up real fast. Okay, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to read there is so many texts that fleshes out understandings that were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls that map out exactly what was happening when it comes to these fallen angels mating with humans, and potentially there's even an argument actually in the Book of Enoch, or found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I don't think it's the Book of Enoch. I think it was I think it was called the Book of Giants, which I'm not sure that this is 100%. Not all these books are credible, but there was stuff found in the Dead Sea Scrolls that talked about the argument between I think it's Lot was the decider of a birth, whether it was born of the Nephilim or born of the father. And I forget who it was exactly specifically that was asking Lot, but Lot ended up being like somebody who tried to tell them, hey, look, like, no, this person is not born of Nephilim. They are indeed genuinely human. And it's very fascinating when you get into Dead Sea Scrolls. And one other thing too to mention is Jude 1:6. And it says the angels who did not stay with their, because a lot of people will be like, well, angels don't marry or given unto marriage, so they can't possibly sleep with women. Well, Jude 1:6, and the angels who did not stay with their own positions of authority, but left their proper dwelling, which was in heaven, right, as a spiritual being, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until judgment for that great day. He's literally talking about these angels that left their proper dwelling, which was to stay as a spirit. Instead, they came into the world and mated with humans and created the perversion that we've been fighting. And we see this throughout history, guys. And there's like tons of evidence about this kind of stuff, that we see remnants of this type of animal human hybrid, genetic mixed hybridization that throughout our historical counts and records. Sorry. Anyways, continue.
No, that's good. I mean, that's good because a lot of people who say that Enoch does not belong in the Bible, they do not realize that the very first Bible was the Ethiopian Bible, and that, yes, that actually contains the Book of Enoch. So when they say it's not in the canon, it's in the oldest one. So it's not in the most recent one, but it's in the oldest one. So it's kind of like you think the ones that's closest to the times of Jesus would be the most applicable to, like the story of what the belief of the people who the Bible would have been written to. What's interesting is some people actually say the reason we know that angels could not have taken wives is because Jesus said the angels in heaven are not supposed to take wives. Do you know why Jesus said that? I mean, obviously, Jesus would know for all kinds of reasons, but Jesus is the confirmation of the word, so he typically is quoting things that were in Scripture and things that they would have known.
Mm-hmm.
Enoch chapter 15. Here's what it says. It says, this says, starting with verse 5. Therefore, I have given them. Well, when it says, let me go back up to verse 4.
I'll say one other thing while you're checking that. Enoch, by the way, side note, there is 2 versions of Enoch 1. One of them is subtly corrupted, and the other one we believe is a little bit more accurate. One of them kind of alludes to things. So people, if you have any debates of whether like the Book of Enoch is correct or not, there is a corrupted version also that subtly makes Enoch out to be like some Jesus type Messiah. But if you read the correct translation and you read the right thing, it straight points to Jesus. Like the Book of Enoch straight up tells you that Jesus is God.
True.
Like it's straight up telling you. And so that's part of the reason why the Jewish people didn't even want the Book of Enoch in the biblical context, because that's
what early Christian fathers said, is that's the reason they took it out.
Yeah, because it points to Jesus so clearly. The Book of Enoch points to Jesus so obviously and clearly. And we'll get into that in future topics of stuff. But continue. What were you saying, JT?
Okay. So this is Enoch chapter 15, and it says, Wherefore have ye left thy high and holy eternal heaven, and lain with women, defiled yourself with the daughters of men, and taken yourselves wives, and done like the children of the earth, begotten giants and sons. And though ye were holy and spiritual, living in eternal life, you have defiled yourself with blood of women, and have begotten children with the blood of flesh. And as the children of men have lusted after flesh and blood, as those who do not die and perish, therefore I have given them wives also, that they might impregnate them and beget children by them, and that thus nothing might be wanting them on the earth. But you were formerly spiritual, living eternal life, immortal in all generations of the world. And therefore I have not appointed wives for you, for you are as for the spiritual ones of heaven in their dwelling. And now the giants who are produced from their spirits and flesh shall be called evil spirits. So it's basically just saying like that, because you're immortal, I have not given you wives. Because like that's why, I mean, that's exactly kind of why Jesus is saying like that in the resurrection, there'll be no wives, there'll be no husbands, because there'd be no need to procreate, because you guys are immortal. And and so when people say that's a reason why this book is wrong, it's like that's what Jesus I believe is quoting from, because he's saying like that you'll be like them. And it's like, well, they did that. It's like, but they weren't supposed to. That's the whole point. It's like they were not supposed to take wives, and that's why they were in chains, and they were chained up inside the earth, awaiting judgment. And I think that that's also an interesting point, is that in the book of Revelation, it mentions angels being in chains. It mentions in Jude's angel being in chains. Peter mentions that angels are chained up in Tartarus. And so I think there's at least 3 examples. You will not be able to go find one Old Testament book that ever mentions any of that stuff. So you could say that, oh, they're getting some kind of a vision by the Holy Spirit, of which true. But I was like, Jude straight up quotes from the Book of Enoch. So we know where he got his information from.
Yeah, we know where he got his vision from.
So like, yeah, so it's likely that they all would have. And these are back in the days where there were scrolls. Scriptures were on scrolls. They were in synagogues, and there was not a book that was all put together. And so they read all the scrolls.
Yep.
And this shaped their world. This shaped their worldview. And I do believe it's sort of fundamental to understanding clearly the Old Testament and what's going on. But it's also
understanding demons today in the world today.
Understanding, it's fundamental to understanding demons. Oh yeah, I should probably just finish reading that little point, because it's actually mentions right there. It says that
there's evil spirits is actually what it comes from.
It says, and now the giants who were produced from the spirits and flesh shall be called evil spirits on the earth, and on the earth they shall be their dwelling. Evil spirits have proceeded from their bodies, because they were born from men, and from the holy watchers is their beginning and their primary origin. They shall be evil spirits on the earth, and evil spirits shall they be called. As for the spirits of heaven, in heaven shall be their dwelling. But as for the spirits of the earth, which they were born upon the earth, on the earth shall be their dwelling. And the giants, and the spirits of the giants, afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, and do battle and work destruction on the earth and cause trouble. They take no food, but nevertheless they hunger, they thirst, cause offenses, and these spirits shall rise up against the children of men because against the women, because they proceeded from them.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
that's a fundamental understanding that these evil spirits, it's like the Bible really doesn't explain where demons came from, but this is the explanation, because I think that sometimes you could say a fallen angel is a demon, and that might just be a word for it. It's like it's in the same way that you could call the devil, or you could call Lucifer, or whatever you want to call that the fallen cherub. You could call him the devil, but devil and demon are almost the same kind of words, right? It's like devil means deceiver, demons is a name for evil spirits, but angels are spirits, but these are different. The demons that are kind of destined to roam, and typically when we talk about demonic possession and things like that, I believe this is the origin for these evil ghosts.
Yep.
Like ghost stories, paranormal stories,
which we'll talk about on this channel, by the way, guys. We'll get into a lot of that.
So like these things are kind of fundamental to all the understanding. So when people say that the Book of Enoch is not something you should read, it's like, but there's lots of questions about demons. There's lots of questions about angels. There's a lot of questions. There's real questions about why God destroyed the whole earth. There's real questions about why God used the Israelites to go destroy just cities and wipe out everybody, men, women, and children, babies, animals, everything. And so that gives people the perspective that the God of the Old Testament was different than the God of the New Testament, different than the God that sent Jesus, his son, to die for us. But no, he was not. Because when you look deeply into the story, or not even deeply, just look more closely at the story, they were going into a land that had Nephilim and giants in there. That's literally what they say when they go into the promised land. There's giants. People
God
like
wasn't
Goliath,
killing people. He was
King
killing...
Og of Bashan. Yeah. Those things are... That's fundamental to understanding the Bible.
That's very important too, because a lot of Christians have this perspective that God just kills people sometimes, guys. Maybe he killed these people, like over in Palestine. Let's just murder all these people because they're against Israel or whatever nonsense they want to say. Dude, God is not a supporter of murder. Okay, I'm gonna tell you right now, he doesn't really fancy murder. Okay, yeah, God is taking people out at certain times, but God is a God of life. He is a God of love, and he is the God of life. He is the breath of life. Okay, so God's not a fan of murder. So if God says go and wipe out those things, there's something not right about those things. Okay, God said kill every man, woman, and child, and even the animals. Okay, why the animals? Because there was something a little bit different about those animals, y'all. They were not fully human. You have to understand. They said there is giants in the land. We don't want to go in there. And this is a very important part that a lot of Christians miss, because Christians have to justify that God murders people or murders babies if they don't understand the Nephilim. If you don't understand the story of it, your perspective of God is a very different God in the Old Testament than he is today. But he's not. It says he's the same yesterday, today, forever. That's because he didn't change. That's because those things that existed prior were not human. Okay, they weren't humans like we are today. We live in a very different world, potentially a world after the revelation has taken place, which is why you don't see animals and humans mixed all over the place anymore. And we'll get into that probably eventually. But the reason why we live in this world is because it is a world that has been renewed by Jesus, by his sacrifice. But the demons are still here, guys. Demons roam the earth invisible, and they come from the death of Originate. This is one of the stories of where demons come. There's actually multiple stories, and we're going to talk about the jinn, and we're going to talk about giants, and we're going to talk about the Muslim religion perspective of demons. The jinn, for those that don't know, this is where you get the word genie, which they believe they're a group of people, which I'm going to tell you right now, jinn doesn't mean what you think it means. Jinn is actually a root derivation, is where we get the word Gentile. Okay, and it's not Gentile, it's giantile. Okay, so people think that we're all Gentiles because we're non-Jewish. No, you're giantile, meaning descendant of giants. You heard the expression gentle giant. It's not gentle giant, it's Gentile giant. Okay,
Well, do you know that
that's literally what this stems from.
I kind of wondered this, Brian, and this is something I have not looked too deeply into. So don't
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying that just straight up that some people say this, that obviously we know that the Bible has been translated and it mentions Jews and Gentiles.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's interesting is that
Giant tiles.
even in the Bible, the Jews do not show up until the Book of Ezra, or the Book of Esther, I should say. And what's interesting is that but the Jews are from Judah. But what some really old Bibles say, or some like original oldest manuscripts, they say Judahites or Udahites.
Yeah,
They don't ever
Udahites.
say the word Jews. So it's kind of like, is it possible that word was added, and also the word Gentile was added when they were not really, those were more, were those words more, I don't know, more narrow focus about certain things? Like, yeah, because like I do wonder, like in those kind of ways, like that we use words casually. It's kind of like in the same way that we just lump certain words all together,
Mm-hmm.
like just God altogether. That's why people say, "Oh, well, there's only one God," and it's like you, yeah. I mean, like there's one true God, there's one Creator, but like there's other gods, and so the Bible mentions Elohim and
Mm-hmm.
words like that, and there's words in the Old Testament that had a little more nuance than they did, and they had more words for it, and we've simplified things in English,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, like things do get kind of lost in translation after thousands of years.
It totally can be, but like when I start breaking this down to the understanding of where the genome of the genetic lineage of the giants went, of the Nephilim, of the giant tiles, like it makes a whole lot more sense when you understand like where the Gentile term stems from, and when you look at the etymology of it, it's pretty clear from an etymological standpoint that like it meant non-human. The
Well,
word Gentile meant
I think that
non-human versus human.
that's the
Mm-hmm.
kind of the issue, though, that I think that's what I'm kind of saying is like that, guys.
Yeah, maybe it's been altered.
If you actually look into like what the people in Israel believe about the people who are not
Well, they
like
say that.
them,
Yeah, they say that they're dogs and they're less than
yeah, no, I
human. They
mean,
call them goyim.
I think that that's the thing. It's like, and I don't necessarily believe that that's always the way it's supposed to be. That everybody who was outside of Israel was viewed as non-human, because obviously that was not the case. Like there was
Well, that's the
obviously
thing. They're giant tile meanings descendant of the Nephilim. So you were
right,
either. So
but not
most people
everybody
had
who was.
some. Well, that's the debate, is that most people had some level of genetic
Well, it
corruption.
would be in the same way that you could have Abraham had more sons than
Mm-hmm.
Isaac, and not just Ishmael too. He actually mentioned after Sarah died, there was more sons, so there was more Shemites. There was more people in that line that
Mm-hmm.
were not given over to the promise. Even again, like you thinking like Joseph's children, Joseph took a wife. Pharaoh gave Joseph a wife who was Egyptian, and there's never any doubt that the people in Joseph's line were fully human. But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's like it's a perception. I do think this is a perspective. This is why some of the things are so jacked up, because certain groups it is racist to assume that everyone who's not like you is not human.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The point is we don't know where the genetic corruption
Well, now it doesn't matter.
ended fully,
We're all the
but
same.
I don't believe that we're all related
Mm-hmm.
to Nephilim. I think
Yeah.
that, but I do think that certain people have obviously put those words in there in a certain way to believe a certain thing, and that actually does make sense to their worldview. Like
Yeah.
you could show evidence of like what the Talmud says and the Kabbalah says, and why they believe a certain way, and why I would say it's
Mm-hmm.
not biblical. I would say it's wrong, but yeah, that's the real kind of racism that's bad. You know
Mm.
what? Look, I should probably read this because this, again, it's just being the first episode. What I find very interesting in the Book of Enoch, chapter 6 and chapter 6 of Genesis do kind of go hand in hand. And so this is an interesting chapter, and this is kind of like, it's interesting that people throw shade at Enoch, and a lot of it does have something to do with Genesis 6. But this is a shorter part of Enoch than people realize, but this is this is really interesting, and I do think this makes sense of like the Ancient Angels podcast has a framework. I think this is a fundamental chapter, and so I'm going to go ahead and start reading from this. And it says, "And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied in those days and were born unto the beautiful and comely daughters, and the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and begat us children. And Shemyaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall pay the penalty of great sin. And they all answered him and said, Let us swear an oath and bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then they swear they all together and bound themselves by mutual imprecations unto it. And they were all 200 who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves to mutual imprecations upon it. And these were their names: their leader Shemyaza, their leader Arkab is a Rakaba,
Rakabel, yeah.
Ramiel, Kokabiel,
Kokabel,
Tamiel, Ramiel, Daniel, Ezekiel, Barakel,
Ezekiel,
Eziel,
yeah.
Amoros, uh, Badariel, Ananiel, Zekiel, Samsonpiel, Satiriel, Turiel, Jomiel, Seriel. These are the chiefs in the tens.
And just so you guys know, the word El at the end of their name is like Michael, Gabriel. El means of God. This is where we get the word Elohim. Okay? So this is El. They are the Els, the Elohims.
Yeah. It was funny. Like I said, Michael, Gabriel. Then when we can get later into, we can start talking about comic books, and you think of like Superman's actual name was Kal-El. I mean, like the chances of that was not, on purpose. I mean, like it's ridiculous. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and read the next chapter. I'm gonna get into the part where they start telling people what the implications of this were, besides the fact that they bore giants. He says, and all the others together with them unto them themselves took unto themselves wives, and each chose from them one from themselves, and they began unto them to defile themselves with them, and they taught them charms and enchantments and cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants, and they became pregnant, and they
And just
bare
so you
great
know, guys,
giants.
this is the roots of witchcraft. Just so you guys know, this is the beginning roots of witchcraft, where it was founded and formed. It was taught to them by fallen angels, and then later, Solomon perfected witchcraft even further into the occultic perspective that we have in the world today. But this is basically the roots of it.
Yeah, and it
And
says,
they taught makeup, by the way, beautifying of
yeah.
eyelids.
Well, yeah, we're getting to that. It says, and
Yeah.
they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells, and who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against the birds, the beasts, the reptiles, the fish, and devour another's flesh, and drink the
And
blood. And
and
the
just so
earth
you
laid accusations against the lawless ones.
And just so you guys know, when it says they began to sin against the birds of the air and the fish of the sea, creatures that crawled on the ground, like to sin against something isn't just to kill it and eat it, guys. That's to mate with it. And if you go into other books, like the Book of Jubilees, it literally takes that further. That text gets read out further, and you understand that it says specifically they began to mix. That verse is elaborated further in Jubilees. It says they began to mix the birds of the air with the fish of the sea and make creatures unnatural and all kinds of different stuff. So it straight up tells you in other texts, even in more detail. So if people are debating, well, what does sin against a bird mean? It means to mate with it.
Well, again, it says all flesh had corrupted their ways on the earth. And interesting that God was going to wipe out all the animals before he decided to save Noah. And I'm going to read this last little chapter, and then we can talk a little bit about it, and then we'll have to probably conclude. And it says, and Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made them known to the metals of the earth, and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and the coloring of tinctures. And there arose godlessness and they committed fornication, and they were led astray and became corrupt in all their ways. Shemyaza taught them enchantments and root cutting. Amarosa taught them resolving of enchantments. Barachel taught them astrology. Kokobel taught them constellation. Ezekiel taught them knowledge of the clouds. Erichel, the signs of the earth, and Samsiel, the signs of the sun, and Seriel, the course of the moon. And as men perished, they cried, and their cry went up to heaven.
Yeah, and Kokobel, just so you guys know, that's also Kukui, which is another name for the child kidnapping, snatching demon, for those that know what Kukui is, but that's like one of its root connections.
But you know what? I think this is a really, really interesting chapter, because
There's so
I
much to
think
unpack there.
many things people have wondered, like, how did the ancients know how to do the things they did? Like, I've always wondered that. I mean, like, has anybody ever wondered, like, how people knew which, fruits and vegetables they could eat, and which ones they could smoke, and which ones they could do weird things with and
Bro,
consume?
ayahuasca is insane. Like the fact that there's to make ayahuasca, there's two plants. There's the bark of one and the plant of another or whatever, and one of them has an inhibitor that one of them has the psychosis thing, but it also has the antidote. Whereas the bark of the tree takes away the antidote that prevents the psychotic part of whatever's in that other plant to create the response that ayahuasca has. Like the probability of nobody's eating bark, okay? Like the probability of them
Right, yeah.
discovering ayahuasca is ridiculous, okay? Ayahuasca, and we're going to talk about drugs and stuff too on here, by the way, in like more detail. But ayahuasca is literally not, it was taught to them. It was shown to them how to create that type of drug.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've often wondered too, is like, so you have all these megaliths around the earth. And I think that's kind of what we get into, like Ancient Angels. If you guys have ever seen the show Ancient Aliens, they obviously present, like, the ancients talked about gods coming amongst them. They mentioned giants. And so the ancient alien theorists, the ancient astronaut theorists is what they call them, to make sound smarter, which is not smart. They try to theorize that the gods they met, because they wouldn't know what aliens were. They were just talking about, like they were talking about space aliens coming down from Mars or Uranus. But what the Bible is actually presenting is, yes, these things came from the heavens. And so again, if the last part of their name says El, that is short for Elohim, and that means God. So yes, so these beings who were superior to man came down and taught them all kinds of things. And so I believe that there was likely some kind of a bargain with the daughters of Cain, gave, the men of Cain gave their daughters over to these angels. And this bargain, they gave men knowledge of all kinds of things. So like, how did they recognize the zodiac? And how did they present it in the same kind of way of like, that's a lion and that's a dragon, and that's, because I mean, I look up in the stars and I'm saying like, yeah, I guess, like, you know what I mean? Like, I can see when you draw the lines, but I mean, like, can you imagine everyone pointing these things out and everyone agreeing about it around the world?
Yeah.
And then you have all these megalithic sites that are presented in a way that line up with Orion, like the Giza Plateau lines up with Orion's belt, and different types of things. They have like solstice type monuments and things. I do believe that there's a possibility that God taught his men, taught his people, because it does mention in Genesis 1:14 that God put the stars, the sun and the moon in the firmament for signs, for season, for days, and for years. So he did that too. But the understanding of probably the kind of astrology that these fallen taught men were likely like something similar to like the horoscopes and things that you can interpret things that have value to only yourself through the stars. But it's that kind of weird knowledge, like that. If you believe basically what you be taught in every Sunday school is that when you see depictions of Noah's Ark, you see people who are wearing like animal skins, you see very primitive people, right? And then Noah loading up a bunch of animals onto a wooden boat. And so we're taught it kind of almost still follows that kind of scientific evolutionary paradigm that man was once really primitive. But I believe that this story is telling that these gods came amongst people. They taught them advanced knowledge of lots of things. And that's how they created the megalithic things like the Great Pyramids and things like that. And I believe that God would not need to destroy a primitive society with a worldwide flood because he could do it really easily. If they're just living in huts and stuff like that. I think the people in the days of Noah were advanced, and they might have been advanced in like not way they didn't have iPhones, but they had something else.
They had spiritual advancement.
They had knowledge,
a spiritual world of perspective. Imagine a world where everybody could see or hear in the spirit. Like how different of a perspective of the world we would have.
Yeah, literally interacting with these things face to face, and obviously some interacting with more than face to face. So they knew things. Even God's people walked with God. They lived hundreds and hundreds of years, almost 1,000 years, and so they have this knowledge, and they're building upon this knowledge. And I think obviously it's interesting in the same way that the serpent corrupts Adam and Eve. They didn't even know like the kind of the start of sin until the serpent influenced them. These fallen influence man in ways that, like it's kind of like, I think that's why this was such a great sin, is like not only did they sin against themselves by sleeping with women, but they taught men to do wicked things that we would never have knowledge of without them telling. It's kind of like teaching a kid things that are way beyond their level in order for them to do bad things.
Yeah, and those things have bred into the occult in so many ways in the world today, guys. That's like a lot of where these practices come from. They come from teaching them from this kind of stuff. And people don't understand, like, even like the practices in like the Mayan calendar. Where do you think they got the Mayan calendar so perfect from, guys? Like, where do you think that Mayan calendar's, the wisdom of how the Mayan calendar functions and all that stuff, it came from something. Do you not know? And they were worshiping something. They were taught by Kukulkan, who came on the stars and left on the stars, who supposedly maybe an alien, or should I say an Elion? Okay, like we call it alien, but isn't that fascinating? It sounds like again, Elion, Elohim. Okay, and yet we call it alien. No, it's Elion. Say it what it is. That's what they're literally telling you what it is. So these creatures, these beings, these the Elohims, taught men stuff, and they taught them wisdom or perspective, or gave them advanced knowledge or understanding of technology and all kinds of different things. Okay, and that came from humans worshiping the Elions. Okay, that's what it came from, for the Elohim worshiping those beings. Gave them, and how'd they do it? They sacrificed. They sacrificed people. The Aztecs sacrificed a bunch of people. They killed a bunch of humans, and the angels, the fallen angels, said, "Oh, look at these godless people. Sure, yeah, you just sacrificed a ton of humans. God's not looking at you. We'll show up. What do you want?" And like, well, you want to worship us? Kill some more humans. It's great. We'll give you more information. Like, this is the kind of stuff that they were doing, and humans have throughout centuries. People are like, oh, we don't know why they were sacrificing humans. They just came to the idea that let's kill people is a great idea. Who the freak thinks that is what happened? They came to the understanding that murdering people, your friends and your family, was a good idea. Let's make this a ritual thing. No, fool. They were doing it because they got something out of it. They did it because something showed up and gave them knowledge and understanding. It's in their papers. It's in their writings. They were doing it at the pyramids. Everywhere you see a pyramid, they were sacrificing people. Everywhere. They were sacrificing, killing humans, sacrificing them to get sacred knowledge and understanding from the gods, from the Elohim. And this is literally what's going on around the world, guys. So it's so prevalent in our culture, but so many people are blind to the reality of what was really happening. But they were sacrificing unto these demons. That's literally what was happening.
Yeah, and so I'm going to set some stuff up, and then we'll probably close here. And obviously, this will be kind of like, there's so much to
there's so
branch
much
off this. But so here's kind of like the general things of why this is important. So yeah, as Brian was discussing, so why did these people like the Aztecs and things sacrifice people to what? To their gods. Okay, so and this is what Ancient Aliens does not quite get, is the fact that we have these fallen angels, and they're fallen in nature, and they came down on purpose to the earth to do what they did. Okay, so if these people who people like the Aztecs don't take credit for building the megaliths, but there's all this talk of ancestor worship. So who are the ancestors? Well, what's interesting is that it mentions in Genesis 6 that the Nephilim were the heroes of old. They were the men of renown. And so when you hear about these ancient kings being gods, earthly kings being gods, I think it's because, well, I don't think it's, I mean, I think that we can prove that it's because they claimed relation to divine beings. So they would claim to be gods. It's like, so if you were begot of an angel from heaven, you would claim to be a god, and you would not necessarily be completely inaccurate by saying that, because you were given this divine right to rule. And I believe that's where the royal bloodlines come from. So then you have these stories about these giants, these Nephilim, creating these grand structures. So I believe, like people like the Aztecs, they went and congregated. They found these places, which obviously I believe that based on the astronomical things and maybe just ley lines and all kinds of things, these megaliths were built on very significant places on the earth. So when they did this, they understood that there was something spiritual about these places. Okay, so now here's the crazy part, is if you go back to what we said about Enoch, it says that the giants, the Nephilim who died, they were destined to roam the earth as evil spirits, unclean spirits. So when you find out how depraved the giants were, they were bloodthirsty, they were cannibalistic, they were awful. Okay, so think about that. These are the beings that were credited with creating these structures. So now when you find out people trying to get knowledge from these beings are killing people to do it, it makes sense, right? You have an understanding of like why they would do it. It's kind of like what they did was crazy and evil, but it's more like crazy like a fox. It's like they didn't do it by not thinking about these things. They were thinking. This is the way that you commune with evil spirits, through blood. And I believe that is exactly why they did some of the wicked things they did. They did it seeking of knowledge in gnosis. And obviously we know that originates from the tree of knowledge, the tree you're not supposed to eat from, and all the bad things. And so this is fundamental to understanding the megaliths, understanding the royal bloodlines.
Understanding everything.
While all our presidents and kings are all related to each other and things like that. It's like, even still today, I think that, again, this topic is something that gives you understanding of so many more things will make sense.
Yes.
When you can kind of understand this whole worldview.
Yeah. When you understand this, like everything in our world today, like clicks. And there's one last verse I wanted to bring up, which was Enoch 19:1, because we mentioned that the women that slept with the angels, like just as a side subject, it says what happened to these women. And I want to mention this one last part because it kind of ties in too. And it says, and Enoch 19:1, and Uriel said to me, here shall stand the angels who have united with women and their spirits, taking many different forms. Okay, guys? It's saying they're taking other forms. Are corrupting mankind and leading them astray to worship demons as gods. So demons are separate than fallen angels. This is a side note. We'll get into that in another title or something related to that. Here they shall remain until the day of great judgment, when they will be judged and brought to the end. And the women of the angels who went astray will become sirens.
Interesting.
And I, Enoch, saw alone this vision of the end of all things, and no man shall see I have seen it. Okay, so the women became sirens. So, like, guys, the Starbucks cup with a siren on it, like,
the
bro,
mermaid.
The Little Mermaid, like, this is the women that slept with the fallen angels became mermaids. And this is in our culture and everything, guys. So, like, understanding this principle, this basis, because this is a basis story of, I mean, we threw in a lot of secret nuggets in there that most people that maybe if you don't know if you know fully already this story, hopefully it gave you something to chew on. But like the basis of this was that And lastly, the women slept with the angels, and God turned them into sirens. Why? Because sirens can't, like, how are you gonna have sex with a fish? It don't work. So God cursed them into fish people, right? Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
so the mermaid logo, the two-tailed thing is like a defiance. That's why she's spreading her two. That's why they gave her two tails. So she's
Yeah,
spreading
which
her
obviously
legs.
that's more like the old logo, but the new one you can't.
You can't
She's
even
still
see the
doing
two
it, but
tails.
you can't quite tell what's happening.
Exactly. You gotta look at the old logos and you'll see, but like it's
Ugh.
alluding to it. But it's because she's spreading her legs apart because it's like a defiance. It's like a middle finger. Like, well, you turned us into a fish, but we're still gonna breed anyways. We're still gonna make our offspring in another way. And like that's kind of the defiance that's going on in our culture everywhere. And even in one last thing I'll mention, even in the word in Japanese, guys, just so you know, this is where demons come from. This is another thing, is like where ghosts come from. It says ghosts proceeded out of the union. It says there because they were not fully flesh and they're not fully spirit, that when their bodies die, these Nephilim off-breed creature things don't go to heaven or hell like we do. They stay on the earth, and their spirits are referred to as evil spirits. That's what JT was reading in that verse, and it's referring to that understanding. Okay, and so if you look up the Japanese word for ghost, guess what it is? It's the word woman plus the word heaven plus the word mystery of life. What do you think that means? Women slept with the children of heaven and formed something, and that's the word yokai, which is the word ghost in Japanese. And when you understand the stories of the Nephilim, ancient Chinese, when you understand it, ancient Chinese, ancient Japanese, everything, your culture, Starbucks, words, like spells, all these things start to like become like puzzle pieces that you're like, oh my gosh, all of it makes sense. Yeah, it all makes sense when you really understand this story of the Nephilim. So I encourage everybody to read the Book of Enoch 1, not the other ones necessarily, but Enoch 1 for sure. I'm gonna say, like, read it to have an understanding
Yeah.
of it if you're
Mm-hmm.
interested in this topic. The other stuff, there's corruption, and be aware that there's corruption, but have the Holy Spirit guide you to make sure that, hey, maybe that's not exactly right, but maybe there's some stuff here. Or if you're reading a wrong version, read a different version. There's multiple versions of these things, guys. So anyways,
Yeah, I would encourage people most certainly,
mm-hmm.
as I encourage people every time, to read the canon as we know it and know that really well.
Yeah,
And I would
you
say
need to know that well before you read Enoch.
Know that best. Study that 1st.
Mm-hmm.
Study that first. You know, before you go get up, you know, if you haven't read through the whole Bible, read that first and then read the Book of Enoch. But read it first, and read it for the things about the giants and the weird things about the things of like what God said to do. And if you're curious about why God did certain things in the Old Testament, look into it. You should know. Like you should try to figure out why he did certain things. But yeah, overall, I think going forward, as Brian mentioned, in Japanese and in different cultures, this is a story that's told worldwide. This is a story that's repeated. And I would say that obviously there's one true story of it. And obviously the details are sparse, but I believe there's one true story. But I think that some people say, oh, well, these people are copying off each other. No. Everyone is telling the same story. And obviously we know people are going to have different perspectives. But I think that's more affirmation to me that all of this is obviously true, is that there's descriptions in almost every culture, in every place on the earth, that there was a worldwide flood. And before that flood, there was wicked giants.
Yep.
And it's not,
demons,
like I said, this is human history. Now, this could be prehistory because we don't have all the records, but we are blessed enough to have the Bible, and obviously that tells this story. And yeah, I believe it's confirmed through all kinds of other things, and other just the fact that the Bible is true. So.
And we're going to get into all of that on this channel, on this podcast, and we're going to bring other people in that also study this subject, like Understanding Conspiracy, Clown Guy, who talks about Nephilim or clowns, Paul. Yeah, and so like we would love, yeah, you know, we want to bring in all kinds of people and start talking about this kind of thing and sharing the wisdom and understanding of what's really going on in our world, guys, because like having this understanding will help you see the lies in the media today. Okay, it even helps you understand the lies that are going on in the media today, surprisingly. Okay, and so it gives you a better perspective of who God actually is, guys. You get to know God, you get to know the Lord better by knowing this stuff, because you see his character. You see he's not some like cruel person that's just murdering people blatant. Like you can understand the feelings of the spirit better. You learn to understand your spirit better. You understand how to hear in the spirit, and you understand what demons are better. And we're going to teach you this because I cast demons out just before this call. Was like literally JT. I was like casting demons out somebody on the call before JT jumped on it.
True. That's true. I
literally
see it.
Yeah, and so like this is literally, but having this wisdom and understanding gives you authority. It gives you peace. It gives you like it helps a lot of things in the world today. So yeah, it's not just a old subject that's irrelevant. It is very relevant. So yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. Well, guys. Obviously, guys, please follow. If you guys like this podcast, obviously subscribe to Demon Racer's channel. If you guys want to hear more of this stuff. Obviously, at some points, there's so many directions we can go. If you guys have people you want us to interview on this podcast, please comment on that. Let us know. Obviously, if you guys have connections, please let us know. But yeah, guys, we're excited about this because I do think that sometimes our interests vary so much, but I think this is something that is important. I feel like like through this podcast, me and Brian obviously will be more amped to make more movies. And I kind of actually hope we do, because to tease a little bit, we were in Vegas, was it last week? And we actually talked to people about promoting Ancient Angels, and the response was actually really good.
Phenomenal. Yeah, it was great.
So I think that maybe this is God giving us the little shot in the rib, say, hey, you guys got something there, so continue to go. So anyways, I appreciate you guys listening. Thanks for having me on the first episode, Brian. Of course.
Thanks for jumping on, and I appreciate everybody following and watching, and subscribe if you're not subscribed, and look forward to more episodes. And thanks everybody for watching. That's it.
Later.
Bye.